we'll turn the time to Dannielle. Thank you very much.
Right. Hello. It's good to be back for this afternoon session. And let me introduce myself. So my name is Dannielle. My whakapapa is, on my maternal side, goes back to Ngāti Porou. My mother was born in Gisborne and I was born in Fielding. On my paternal side, it's English. My dad is English, but there's also Welsh and Irish, very strong connections to Wales and Ireland. So that means, and then I, of course, my parents, we landed up in South Africa for over 30 years before returning to New Zealand. And so therefore my location is wherever I live, whoever I'm with, what's important to me. So I'm just still defining it. So I'm married with 3 living young single adults, and I have a son who's just passed on. Well, not just, gosh, how's that for afternoon slump? He passed on like 27 years ago at birth. I am a service manager for a resident psychiatric forensic rehabilitation unit for recovery and for people who have committed very, very serious crimes. I have a discipline of being a social worker, and so I'm quite passionate about helping people having meaningful experiences, which enhances their lives. Often we find that people think meaningful experiences are about what we think are important, but it's actually about what someone else thinks. Also making connections. I love making connections and having narrative conversations. So if you look at the top left-hand side, I think, of the screen, you will see there's just an icon from one of the beaches for Ngāti Porou. I particularly love the beaches. I grew up around the sea. And on the right-hand side of the screen, I have a beautiful picture of Table Mountain, which is a mountain that's quite unique in Cape Town. It sits in the middle of the city. So the city was built around the mountain. And if you look at the top, you'll see it's quite flat. So it's called Table Mountain because it's flat like a table. And then because I have just a deep passion and connection to trees, I have my tree, which, you know, the tree of life, family trees, all of them are just amazing for me. So really love that connection to the environment for myself. So I just wanted to make this disclaimer that this presentation is going to introduce you to the concept of sensory modulation, and we're going to connect it on how to use our senses to reduce anxiety. It's not the beginning and end of everything. It's really like a taste tester. So we're going to look at what sensory modulation is. We're also going to look a little bit at the brain, about grounding. We're going to look at anxiety, and interwoven throughout the presentation is, and of course, largely the senses. And interwoven will be some kind of just comments about how to use that sense for minimizing anxiety or managing anxiety. So the sensory, what is sensory modulation? In its very most basic form, it really is the ability for our nervous system to regulate and organize and prioritize incoming sensory information. Also to inhibit irrelevant information and allow a person to focus on what is relevant. So often we're bombarded with information. I've used the example of a party, but also if you're going into a mall and everyone's playing their music and you're with your family and everyone wants to talk to you, and you've just got to your brain has to make sense of where you are, what you're doing, how you're doing it. So sensory modulation through your senses, it helps you to sift out what you don't need for that moment. This is another definition of sensory modulation. It's how it feels. So when the brain has difficulty sorting out incoming sensory messages, you can see it's kind of like driving in the rain where you've got car lights. And I need to wear glasses when I'm watching TV, but I don't need to wear them during the day. So often when it's raining and it's like that kind of semi-darkness, this is really difficult for me and it's a very stressful moment. That's what it feels like for our brain when we're trying to make sense of all the different stimuli that we have. So why would you use, or why is sensory modulation so vital and important to us to not only utilize, but to understand. So probably the basic thing is that sensory input is helpful when our ability to think clearly is reduced, or when we are vulnerable. So like when we're anxious, sad, upset, distracted, under stress, ill, frightened, just out of sorts. It's also an opportunity to ground ourselves, and grounding we'll talk about a little bit later. In essence, grounding is really basically in settling ourselves or getting into the moment. The other thing that sensory modulation really, really helps us with is it helps us understand that we are in control of ourselves. And the reason for that is because we know ourselves better. So I'm going to make some personal comments like, don't let anyone else tell you that they know what's best for you, because you know yourself better. So when your, call it gut instinct, call it your sense is telling you to do something, well, you know what, there's probably a reason for that. So let's look at the brain. At the top of the brain, you've got the by the way, the brain, just so that you know, is not colored like this. It's kind of a gray matter, literally. But for the purposes of this presentation, we've got the neocortex, which is our rational or thinking brain. And then in the middle of the brain, you can see with the orange line or the orange arrow, it points to a little piece of brain that's called the limbic brain. And you know, it's interesting, look how small that limbic brain is and how big the neocortex. But the limbic brain is your brain that feels all your emotion, or what we call the feeling brain. And what's really, really interesting about that is the limbic brain is normally the boss, because we feel things. And at the bottom, we've got the red arrow shows you the reptilian brain, which is our instinctual or dinosaur brain. It's often called the primitive brain. And if you look where it's connected to the brain stem, which is pink. And the brain stem is connected to our central nervous system that runs down our neck and down our spine. And is the job of the central nervous system is to keep us safe. So let's just quickly look at the brain. The brain, when it's vulnerable, because we're talking about vulnerability here, it never knows whether to respond or react. So when you are uncertain, your brain, your rational brain, your thinking brain says, here you go, limbic brain, feeling brain, thought brain. I can't think, I can't do anything, I'm just feeling. So it gives control to the limbic brain. And the problem is that sometimes we're just not, well, rational when we're thinking. So we need to engage our rational brain to keep ourselves on track. A little bit difficult to do, but if we use our senses, we really can get ourselves back into flipping back into control of things. Just by the way, I will give my email address at the end. So if anyone wants a copy of this PowerPoint, as well as I don't have the templates attached, the templates on how to understand yourself from a sensory point of view, I'm happy to email it out, but if you can email me, I would appreciate it. So you're welcome to take notes, but you will also get the PowerPoint if you want it. So going back to the brain, we feel things first, the limbic system, and then we assign meaning. So that goes to the rational brain. This happens, I think it's like 134,000 milliseconds between the two, feeling it and making a decision. So it's really rapid, even though it may feel quite long. So the brain connects our senses connect us to the world, and they are there to keep us safe. So that's sight, seeing, sight, hearing, etc., etc. Our brain uses the feedback from our senses to work out whether we're safe or need to fight or need to run away. So I'm going to say this over and over, and that's just so that it may just get stuck in your brain, so that you just automatically fall back on that. The central nervous system, which is the part of the body that governs all of us, it feeds directly into the brain. And the brain is there to say, is my human being safe? Are they unsafe? If they are safe, great, I don't have to do anything. If they're unsafe, I need to do one of three things. I need to fight, I need to flee, or I need to freeze, okay? So I'll give you an example, for instance, of a dog. For instance, if you've been mauled or bitten by a dog, or you know somebody who has, generally when dogs are going to bite you, they growl. especially if they're really going to, maul you. So you've had that experience, and now, you've moved on. However, you might be going for a walk a month, 6 months, a year, 10 years down the track. You might be somewhere where you hear a dog growling. Your brain will jump right into the limbic system and it'll go, okay, I need to check, is my human safe or unsafe? Because remember what happened last time when we heard the growling, they got hurt. So your brain will be thinking, do I need to fight, which is prepare to defend yourself? So you look for a stick. Do I need to flee? So that means I have to escape, which would in this case be running away. Or am I going to freeze, which means I'm stuck in that moment, so I'm immobile, all to protect us. Okay, and this is happening so deeply under our subconscious that often we're not aware of it until we highlight this to ourselves and raise awareness. Now, senses. So where senses, remember the limbic brain is our emotional or feeling brain, and how senses and emotion can help us are they can relax us or calm us down, or where we need to be more alert or energized, they can energize us or help us become more alert. It's also to help us be in tune with our body and our environment around us. So it helps us with environmental awareness. Now, what I mean by environmental awareness when I say this is it is about how do I respond to the environment and how does the environment respond to myself? So if we may be anxious about something and we go into an area that makes us anxious, how are we going to respond to that? Are we going to get, hot, sweaty, stressed, nervous, etc., etc.? And that's not good or bad. That just is, and it's how we manage that. So senses and emotion also help us feel more in control or more aware. If you have a look down at the bottom, you'll see there's a little diagram and it's got a round circle for senses that feeds to emotions, that feeds to making meaning. Because remember, the rational brain makes meaning after we've felt it. And then it leads to us taking action. Oops, sorry, let me go back to this. So we're just going to talk a little bit about how we can use our senses to lessen the anxiety, firstly by calming and secondly by alerting. So in calming, if we want to calm ourselves, we're feeling, regardless of whether it's on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being just mildly and 10 being quite catastrophic, we can do, feeling anxiety, we can do things that are familiar to us to calm ourselves down. Things that are slower paced, things that are rhythmic, so things that we have a positive association with, things that are predictable, keep it simple and low demand. What we want to do here is to calm ourselves when we're feeling somewhat anxious, is we don't want to do things, this is if we want to calm ourselves, we don't want to do things that's going to put too much pressure on us for our senses to have to act. However, if we want to alert ourselves, there is, of course, so you need to kind of go from being lethargic or having your senses dampened, do something that's new so that there's a newness. You also can increase your pace so that you're thinking faster or you're moving faster. Do something that's strange or unusual, or rather, should I say, something that you're not used to, so that you can't predict what will happen next. It could be something impulsive, it could be something you thought about but you've not done. And maybe something that's complex. And again, choose your scale of how much or how low you're going to go. So your sense of touch, we're going to look at first. Touch has, so we've got 5 senses, which is, we'll go through, and we call them the external senses, and then we've got 3 internal, or they are the calming senses. So firstly, if we look at touch, remember this is in conjunction with how our senses will help us manage anxiety. So the job of touch is really protective for us. And it has 4 main areas it protects us in: pressure, heat, cold, and pain. So for example, there's a very common illustration or knowledge of if a person puts their hand on a hot plate And I know that people think that that doesn't happen so often. And we have one of those hob stoves that comes up bright red. But when it's cooling down, the redness goes, and there's a little red dot that says hot. And the other day, without thinking, I saw the hot thing, but because my brain didn't commute hot, and I put my hand onto the, don't ask me why, I just put my hand onto the stove, but I pulled it back so fast that there was no damage done. That was my sense of touch saying to me, whoa, remember the brain, keep me safe. The central nervous system felt that pain and said, get out of here. We need to make an instant decision. And then I could think about it rationally. So sometimes when we're extremely anxious, because remember, that's the thing, is that our anxiety causes us to be not so rational, because we're busy worrying about what we're feeling inside. If you're really anxious, something that's really useful is to take ice and hold it in your hand. So it really does help because it shocks you. The cold brings you back into, I don't mean an electric shock, it just brings your body into being present in the moment. And the other thing that I need to tell you is that if you have, for people who are pregnant, for people who might be menopausal, for people who experience heat overwhelmingly, a really good tip is when you've opened your can of baked beans or your can of corn over the next couple of days, you keep both cans and you fill it with water after you've washed it. Fill the can with water and you freeze it. And you know, when you're watching TV, you just roll the can underneath your feet, or when you're sitting at the dinner table. It will cool your entire body down. And I am one of those people who gets extremely hot. And when I'm hot, I'm frustrated and I'm edgy and I'm short-tempered and I'm just not a happy person to be around. The coolness, because you're in control of the situation, you're rubbing your feet. So cold is really useful. Hearing. So hearing is a mechanical sense. It turns physical movements into the electrical signals that make up the language of the brain. And then these translate into vibrations that we experience as sound. So when we hear things, we don't actually hear, go and put on the kettle. The hearing is taking the vibrations or the electrical signals and it's feeding that in, because it's electrical impulses that give us messages. When we hear things, or our sound comes from the inner ear, and we have the ability to identify loud, soft, high, low, near, and far noises in the environment. It's really interesting because particularly if you think of, I believe it's dogs that can hear very, very high pitched or low pitches that we can't hear. And you'll often hear a dog like whining. And you're like, what's going on? Or I have a child who from a young age would always put his hands over his ears because he couldn't stand loud noises. So it's very important one of the biggest things you're doing is you're paying attention to how people respond or yourself responds in your senses, in your environment. So for instance, if your hearing if you're distressed and anxious, you might want to listen to calming music, whatever you see as calming music. You might put on some pleasant music that just, it's just nice. If you like the beach, you might go and sit and listen to the waves, or doing something that will just settle you and allow your brain to know that you're no longer in crisis and that you can make rational decisions. Smell is unbelievably powerful. In fact, it's the most powerful sense we have. It's primitive and it's protective. And the reason why it's so powerful is because it's directly connected to the limbic system, which is, remember, the feeling part of our brain. And the limbic system tells us, or says, oh, you're feeling threatened, you're feeling this, you're feeling that. The other thing that with smell is you can perceive and differentiate odors. Smell can be positive or negative, or it can just be neutral. One thing to remember is that smells can trigger memories. Now, I have to tell you, I have an aunt who has no sense of smell and no sense of taste. So she had some damage to her olfactory, which is smell. And often her children used to say, Mum, this is really yum. And it wasn't, but she couldn't smell it, she couldn't taste it. So, I mean, they didn't do it too often because she would find out. Because, you know, we can smell things and we can think, oh, this doesn't smell so good. Smell is amazing for if you are anxious. You could light a scented candle, or you might even just smell the scented candle. You can have aromatherapy oils. Just let me interrupt and say that I do have templates that will help you to work out which senses are the most powerful for you. It could be taste, it could be hearing. And that's, of course, what you would build up a management plan for yourself. Also, the other thing is when you're thinking of senses, don't think, oh, I only use smell. You can use one or more at the same time. Generally, our senses don't work in isolation. The other thing you can do with smell is you can make yourself little, I have a workbook that I send out as well, which gives you a whole lot of ideas of things you can do. But you can go to the $2 shop or the $1, $2, $3 and you buy those tiny little round containers. If you buy them, that little see-through plastic ones, I think there's 6 for $2 or something. Take some cotton wool, you put it into the container, and then you tip some essential oil or aromatherapy oil, one that's productive for yourself, and you can just smell it when you need to. So very useful if you're at a function or you're in the mall and you're feeling a little bit anxious, and just taking that out and smelling it and putting it away helps you to, it just is a very normal activity. Nobody will look at you and go, what's going on? And it's more useful to try and take care of anxiety earlier, as soon as you can, when you're starting to feel it. The other thing that I just wanted to mention about all our senses is that never forget they're there to protect us. So it's back to the limbic system, the emotion, the feeling. Are we in danger? Do we have to run away? Or do we have to freeze? Or do we have to just stay where we are? Oops. Well, isn't that useful when you're just not going the right way? Taste. So taste is very closely linked with oral motor. Now, that we'll discuss, as you will see in 2 more slides. But the most basic explanation for taste is that it helps us detect the chemicals that make up food. So when I was very young, I mean, I can't remember how young I was, but I can recall the memory of my mother always saying to me, stop smelling your food. And I don't know why I smell my food. It actually took me about 45 years to find out why, 40 years. A number of years ago, I was diagnosed with, I smell the food discreetly. Obviously, I don't pick up a plate and stick it under and I goes, this smells terrible, or, oh, this smells good. I had never understood why I was smelling it. Clearly, my brain was helping me to understand there might be something chemical that I can't eat. So I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. And yes, there are some basic foods I can't eat, like onions or garlic. But then there are some foods I can eat lasagna today and I can eat lasagna tomorrow. One day I'll have a reaction to it and one day I won't. And the reaction's extremely painful. So, but a discrete smell tells me this something, and there's nothing wrong with the food. It's not off, it's not bad. Just something in that is saying, no, you know what, give it a miss today. So flavor and taste are often confused with each other. Flavor is your taste and your sense of smell working together, and they form a perception. So there you go, the senses working together. So you smell something, you taste it. So you might smell like some off milk. It's not, doesn't smell so good. And then you taste it and it's like, nah, it's all right. It's just the lid of the milk that kind of has a little bit of old milk. Or no, this is really off. So flavor and taste work together. I mean, flavor is your taste and it works with smell. Taste is also received through your sensory organs, such as your tongue. Your tongue has got a lot of sensory organs there. They've got taste buds and receptor cells. And if you look at the middle picture, you'll see the shape of the tongue. Right at the back of the tongue is where the taste of bitter comes up. In the middle, it's sweet, and right at the tip of your tongue, it's sweet and salty. And on the sides of your tongue is the taste of sour. What that just means is when you're eating, because, we don't eat just something sweet. There's always a combination of flavors. Your tongue will pick up the different flavors and will be able to sift it out. That's a bit like a sifting process. I'll come back to the tasting foods. It does help also with the textures and taste of food. For example, I love avocado pears. I absolutely adore them. They're like my favorite, especially when you like cut them up with, put a bit of salt and pepper and some vinegar, and then you mash it all up and eat it on toast. Yum. Or make a sandwich. However, when I cut an avocado pear, I look at it and I can immediately see whether that's not going to be so good for me because of the texture. You know, not all avocado pears are created equally. Some of them are a little bit more smoother, and the smoothness is just doesn't sit well with me. It's nothing wrong. My whole family will eat that, but I can't eat it. So then I'll have a little smell, and it's like, and I'll have a little taste, and I'm like, this is just, it's almost too compact for me. So it's really useful to help us with textures or the taste of a food. And it doesn't mean that something's right or wrong. It just means for you, that's not a good thing. Just remember, if you're on medication, so whether it's diabetic, whether it's blood pressure, whether it's a combination, your taste does become compromised. So you may find yourself eating a lot of salt or sugar, and that's because it has none or little flavor ability to taste the food. You don't think so, hey? But next time you have something to eat, check out how much salt you put on your food. Or when you cook with salt, do you have people saying, gosh, this is very salty, and you don't taste that? It may be that you have a little bit of and you're on medication, you may be a little bit compromised with your taste. It's not a problem. All you do is you just compensate by maybe using some more herbs. So just to give you an idea, because anxiety we'll talk about in a couple of slides, it's when you're feeling like lethargic and you don't really feel like doing anything because you're so anxious, sometimes eating extreme tasting foods like lemons or hot sauce will give you that zing or that boost. So taste is really useful for that. Also anxiety. So we used to, and I said into earlier presentations and previous presentations, don't judge me, man, but I'm a Big Mac fan. And yeah, Macca's, I know there's all those videos and it's all bad and everything else. However, for my family, anxiety is mitigated by Macca's and a McDonald's burger. And I'll tell you why. Many years ago, when Paula and I first had our children and we were really struggling for finances, on a Friday night, every fortnight, we would take our children to McDonald's and we would buy them the $5 meal and we'd get the $5 meal. And then we'd say to them, eat your food. And they mostly didn't want to eat because they wanted to play. And for us, that was about some downtime for Paula and I. It was minimum cost to us. And it was a wonderful memory. So sometimes when we're feeling anxious, I think about that and I remember the association of that wonderful memory with McDonald's. And actually, most times when I drive past those golden arches, I think of that memory often. Or when we're at home and we're talking, we'll often talk about those days, back in the good old days, my children call it. So the powerhouses of calming, which is very important for our sensory modulation, is three of the most important ones are internal centers, which are very hard to see. They are vestibular, which is rocking, oral motor, which is sucking, and then proprioception, which is wrapping. And we'll go through each one of those now. So proprioception is kind of basically, it's the deep tissue work. So it's where your body is moving and how much effort you need. So it's the pressure. Okay. And the receptors are in your muscles and your tendons, your ligaments and your joints. So basically proprioception, because it's a deep tissue thing, you may have people or yourself who feel anxious sometimes, and you feel like your body is just dislocated from your mind, or you might feel like, there's just too much space between yourself and everyone else. Wrapping is very useful. So when I say wrapping, you know what? You can go and spend heaps of money on all these flash things, or you can just get yourself a bit of material from the material shop, some lycra if you like to be wrapped tightly, and you give yourself a hug you just put your piece of material around you, and it's like a hug you put in around yourself. Or you could get just some material, period. You don't have to have lycra. It depends on the texture of the material as to when you feel it, if it feels good. Also, you can do things, so you can do things like buy weighted items, a blanket or an animal, but they start between $400 and $500, and they go to about 1,500 to 2,000. For me, when I work with people who the clients I work with, we just go down to the $2 shop with them, get them to choose their own little stuffed animal. We have workshops, obviously, and they pull out all the stuffing. They push it back with either sand, pebbles, beans, whatever it is that's heavy, and then they sew it up. And so they carry that weighted thing around with them, put it in their pocket, or when they're feeling a little bit anxious about something, and if that's one of the things that settles in, they just keep it. The other thing is that if you're feeling like your body pressure is out of sync, is to get a backpack and fill it with stuff that you feel comfortable with, or just make it heavy enough for you so that you can feel. Because sometimes if you're having a problem with proprioception or your deep tissue, it's because you're not feeling yourself properly. It means that your body feels out of sync. So it's about just keeping yourself in one place, breaking that process. Interestingly, I said earlier on, we wrap babies and they get really settled. So it's a hug, basically. Vestibular, or your balance. Now, this is about your changes in position and movement. So the first one, proprioception, is about the pressure. This one is about your changes in your movement. So vestibular, or balance, it supports having a stable visual field, obviously balance, and your sense of your body position in space. So how you're moving and where you're moving and what pace you're moving at. It's also about posture and muscle tone. And then there's a gravitational awareness. So for example, you see the picture of the hammock. So when your vestibular balance, like mine, is not that great, I would look at the hammock and my brain would say, my limbic brain would say, danger, danger. Because, you know, as you're going to go and sit down, that hammock is going to tip and you're going to fall on your face, because my gravitational awareness is a bit compromised. So, for instance, I won't go and sit, aside from the fact that I might be worried about breaking the flipping tree or whatever it's tied to. It's about the fact that I actually know, because the hammock swings. However, if I'm anxious, I might sit in a rocking chair, or you can dance, or you can do something with movement that will settle you, but do it with movement that keeps you safe. Because remember, the limbic brain is always on tap to put us into a state of crisis and say, oh, danger, danger. So the oral motor is, it's a muscle function, and oral motor is here in your mouth. The chewing that we do alerts something called the vagus nerve, and that vagus nerve's job is to digest our food. So the oral motor helps us to know the range of motion, how far we move our food when it's chewed. So, you know, if it's like an ice block, we might just be sucking it and then it will slide down. Eating a piece of steak, it's going to take a lot more chewing to push that down your throat. The oral motor also, its job is to help us differentiate taste, temperature, and texture. So, oh, this tastes nice, or doesn't taste nice, or the temperature's too hot. So if you've put your Milo in the microwave and you've put it on for 2 minutes and you take it out and you go to sip it and you burn yourself, that's about that temperature. If you're anxious, a really good thing to do is, remember, it's about the whole process here. Suck. Sucking is really good for you. So you could take a straw. I always like to make things really simple, and I like to make things really attractive, because if it's attractive, we're going to engage in it more. So I went to, when Briscoes were having a sale, and they had these beautiful kind of like, I call them my goblets. They're just a plastic cup, and they were marked down to 50 cents. But they had different colors, because I love colors. So I bought myself some green and some, I can't remember the 3-4 colors that we've got, green and blue and something else. So I'll fill that up with ice, and then I'll put cold water on top of it, and I'll suck it through a straw. Not only does it settle you, but it makes you feel good. And as I said, I get quite hot. You could also chew. So chewing gum or bubble gum. A lot of people carry like those packs of minties or the fruit bursts, and they might just have one every now and then. When they're anxious, it's just because what you're trying to do is you're trying to break the pattern. Crunching ice, if your teeth allow you to do that, because again, ice is a very, very good process for releasing anxiety because it's such a quick cold shock. Breath support. So supporting your breathing, you can do that through blowing bubbles, through balloons. They're all useful. Now, let's look at what anxiety is, because those are our senses. So anxiety is an emotion, a feeling of nervousness or fear or apprehension or worrying. So notice that it's an emotion. So let's go back to the big brain, whose job is to keep us safe. So the other words attached to it, it's feeling nervous, it's fear, it's apprehension, it's worrying. Emotions are motivators. So they help us or motivate us to act. Be very careful not to categorize all emotions as good or bad, because they're not. They're just emotions. What most people do not recognize their anxiety for what it is. Instead, they think something is wrong with them. Please, if you take nothing away from this presentation today, and you do have some experiences with anxiety, there's nothing wrong with you. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you or anyone else. What there is finding ways to cope with it. Just like if somebody lost a limb, you'd find ways to cope with not having that limb. If somebody has damaged a limb, you'd find ways to cope. You know, if we've just cracked our wrist, we have a band put on it and we are more careful. The same with anxiety. We just manage the anxiety or what's causing us anxiety. So, is anxiety a friend? In other words, helpful? Let's see. Anxiety is normal. Everyone experiences anxiety at times. It's very normal to feel anxious if you're going to go on a roller coaster, particularly if you're me, because I hate roller coasters. Or before you're giving a talk. Anxiety helps activate our defense or performance mechanism. So it helps us to do that. Remember, we talked about fight, flight, or freeze? Anxiety helps us with that. Also, that response is called the adrenaline response. So it helps us to prepare to defend our body. Back to the central nervous system. Must I stay and fight? Must I run away? Or must I just freeze? So in the case where there is real danger, for example, a car coming down the road and you're going to step in front of it and your body goes into the get out of the road, that's helpful. But if you're preparing to give a presentation or a talk and you're feeling anxious about it, it's good to just have some management. And if you cannot give the talk because your anxiety is really strong, then all you do is you find a way around that. So make it work for you. What is not helpful, so it becomes our foe, is when we experience anxiety in that we perceive or think we're in danger. So like I said earlier on, if there's a car coming and there's an actual danger, well, that's a different matter. But if it's a perceived danger, such as walking in the mall or giving a talk, or whilst it might cause you anxiety, it's not something that is going to cause you to maybe derail completely. What it is it's anxiety about something you're not comfortable with. So therefore, it's not helpful, because actually we learn to be comfortable with things as we practice them. So it's back to managing it. So how do I manage anxiety? I'm going to just take a couple of seconds to do a breathing exercise with everyone, because one of the most effective things is to do calm breathing. So if you can put your feet on the floor, or if you just where your feet in the floor touch, or your feet in a solid item, and your hands, just leave them next to you. You don't have to put them in your lap. You don't have to, just let them be loose. Now, I don't care about any sound you are hearing. We're not focusing on that. We're not doing meditation. We're just going to look at your breathing. You can close your eyes or leave them open. If you leave your eyes open, maybe just look at the floor, and that's just so that you can focus on the breathing. So I'm going to start now, and all you're going to do is follow my voice. So just breathing in, 1, 2, and breathing out, 1, 2. And we'll do this another time. Breathing in, 1, 2, and breathing out, 1, 2. And then finally, for the third time, breathing in, 1, 2, and breathing out, 1, two. And when you're comfortable, you can just come back into the present, so opening your eyes and or just focusing back in. Now, the breathing exercise, you can start with 3 breaths. You can go up to 5, 10, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. That's up to you. I would suggest you build up to that. The other thing about breathing is you can even do it in the car. Obviously, if you're driving, you won't be closing your eyes, but it is just about breathing in and out and talk yourself through it. The other thing you can do is muscle relaxation, really useful for managing anxiety. So while we're talking, if you want to clench one of your hands into a fist, so tense that muscle, and then while I'm going to count you through it, I'll just count to 2 as you slowly release it. So really tense, and then breathing in, 1, 2, slowly opening your hand, 1, 2, and just keeping on breathing. You may find that that muscle is tingly a little bit, but it's you are becoming present. If you can't sleep at night, that's a really useful thing to do is you start at the bottom of your feet, your toes, and you clench them or pull them back, and you work and breathing in, 1, 2, breathing out. And you work your way up by clenching or tensing every bit of your muscle you can. And by the time you get to your head, you're probably going to be feeling really relaxed and calm. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 model we'll do in a few slides. Be aware of your body. Recognize what your body is telling you. Our body is really unbelievably smart. That's the most smartest thing. We've just forgot to learn to listen to it. So, how's your breath? Are you breathing too fast, too slow, shallow? Are you hiccuping breathing? Something's wrong. So go into your breathing and breathing slow. Don't try and deal with a crisis. Remember, your body is feeling unsafe when you're not in control of your body. So like if you're feeling anxious, don't try and think what's going on. Get yourself breathing in, and then you can reflect. You can go back to your rational brain and say, what happened? Are you too hot or cold? Are you in a room that's got no air in it? Is there too much noise around you? People are talking, you can't focus. Are you feeling nauseous? Do you have the butterfly in the stomach feeling? Have you got a headache? Are you sensitive to light? Listen to your body and just breathe. And you will find that as you listen to your body and you mitigate that, so that you're in the room, there's too much noise, you remove yourself from the room. And then you find out what's going on for yourself. So we talked about grounding earlier, and basically this is what grounding is. It, in its most basic form, grounding is just another way of explaining how to balance ourselves. So that's what we're doing with anxiety. We just want to balance ourselves, come back to the moment, say to the limbic brain or our emotion feeling brain, it's okay. Thank you for protecting me. I'm okay. Just breathe. And then go into the rational brain and helping to make sense of it. It's also an effective way to calm anxiety at any time, and particularly during a panic attack. So in this process, you identify objects around you to help your brain recognize where you are. Because I don't know if you've ever been so anxious or almost panicked that you actually just can't work out where you are or what you're going to do now. You're spinning. When you recognize where you are, it helps you to become comfortable. And because when you know where you are, and you feel more in control of your situation. So it's more about, remember, you are the expert on you. So it's about you taking control of you, which is working with your central nervous system, who's sending all these messages to your emotional limbic brain saying panic, stress, anxious. And you're going, actually, I'm going to breathe first, or I'm going to think about if I'm hot or cold or sweating. So 5, 4, 3, 2 model is literally that. When you're feeling anxious or uncomfortable or worried, whichever word you want to use, think of 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Then breathe in and out slowly. And again, let's do it 3 times. It's a bring in, 1, 2, breathing out, 1, 2. Now, I'm not sure, because there have been times where I've forgotten, is it see first or is it hear first? I think it's just the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 model. It's just tapping into those 5 different senses. And whether you feel 5 things and you hear 1 thing, I'm not sure that that makes a difference, because what you're trying to do is ground yourself, bring yourself back into the moment. So William James said, the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over the other. Remembering it's our ability to say to the central nervous system, thank you so much for telling me there's a problem, and telling my emotional brain or my limbic brain there's a problem. But actually, I'm going to go to my rational brain and I'm going to think about things. We have that power. That's the ability to be human. The other thing to remember is that anxiety is one little tree in your forest. Step back and look at the whole forest. And that was by Unknown. So I've got my email address up, which is dannypaulabisogno@gmail.com, all lowercase. But I just, in conclusion, want to just say a couple of things. Use your senses. Like I said, I have some templates that will help you to tick off where you find yourself most powerful. You won't always use one sense, you'll use one or two. For me, my most powerful ones are smell and taste. But I mean, I use my sight, I use my hearing. Just some days you might use something more than another. And always remember that the reason why we feel that sense of anxiety, or the reason why we are worried, nervous, etc., is coming from our central nervous system, because it's trying to make us feel safe. And then it feeds to the limbic system, and the limbic system is not rational. It's a feeling brain. Okay, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful piece of our brain, and it can make us feel catastrophic so quickly, because it's like, there must be a problem, there must be a problem, where our rational brain can say, nah, not really. Okay, so if we can just remember that with anxiety and find yourself strategies that help you manage it, whether it's breathing, whether it's sucking through a straw, whatever it is,